a few of our favorite things. So one of the things we like to do at the beginning of an event is kind of get everybody into loosely the same mindset in terms of what the FME technology stack is for, what it does. But also we want to draw out some of the things that are new and are happening at the moment that we think matter and we think are important. So that's the idea with this session. And we kind of just want to talk initially about FME's reach, because one of the main selling points of being an FME user is that you can connect to data wherever it is. And SAFE talk about FME as being the all data platform, the ability for you to get to any format, any container, any location that data is stored, to allow you to consume it and do something to it and integrate it with other systems. So if you have got data, it's so often not the case these days that it's all just in one single source of the truth. You're very likely going to be reaching out to a third-party partner or an API. You might have a database that's hosted locally. These days, organizations are starting to have hybrid setups. So we're starting to see, different capabilities concerned with databases. You might have a penchant for open source, so PostGIS is your thing. You might prefer Microsoft, well, you've probably got an Azure SQL database if that's the case, or you might have a SQL database on-prem, or a database hosted on a web service like AWS. You might want to do all your data processing right next to where the data sits, and you might be using Kafka or GCP, Google Cloud Platform, to do that. You might be accessing data in a hosting platform, a hosting environment. So these days, the big three of Azure and AWS, and to a lesser extent Google, being started to add to that environment with providers like DigitalOcean and Alibaba to have hosting environments. You might be a Windows shop, you might prefer Linux, you might want containers, Docker or Kubernetes. The point is that you can kind of put FME into these places and you can get data from those locations as well and move them between those environments. REST endpoints we're going to touch on a little bit later on, but you might be connecting to third-party APIs or partner data sets that are being published. SOAP requests, you might be working with standards-based APIs. The whole conversation around AI kind of got kicked off in a couple of years ago with ChatGPT and OpenAI, but since then that space has kind of exploded with competition and capability, and a lot of the different AI services are good for certain things, and SAFE are effectively saying that FME is all about any AI service. They want you to be able to connect out to those services, grab access to a particular capability, pass in the data that you care about, and you can cherry pick the tool that's appropriate for you. So if you happen to have a bit of a security concern around AI, but you still want to try and, put your toe in the water, well, maybe Llama is a good choice for you, because you can install it locally on your machine and run the model locally without passing any data to the outside world at all. But maybe you're interested in image analysis, and then maybe Google Gemini would be a more appropriate for you. We think it's so important at the moment, as I say, and I alluded to at the beginning, we've created a dedicated training course, runs over 2 afternoons, a day's worth of material, looking at connecting to and different use cases that are related to working with generative AI, generative text, and also with imagery and multimodal AI services. So it's a really exciting space at the moment. Coming back down to earth a little bit and looking at some of the broad reach that FME's got to some of the traditional data sets that you're very familiar with. If you care about 2D or 3D or CAD data or GIS or raster or vector or XML, whatever you care about, FME can reach into that data set, that container, and can do something with it in the spatial context. And we see scenarios of, as I said, we work with an agri-tech company taking soil salinity and temperature data from IoT, Internet of Things devices, and loading that into a Postgres database, working with 2D and 3D data, BIM for building information models, LiDAR data and scanned imagery from survey companies, indoor mapping, bringing the blue dot indoors. We've got a session later on looking at Schiphol port and looking at their BIM data. In terms of data locations, the capability that FME's got to position the technology, the ETL tool that is FME, nice and close to your data is also changing over time. This is kind of some of the capability that you've got at the moment. So traditional use of FME Form and Flow is that you would install on an on-prem server somewhere in your organization. But increasingly we're seeing organizations moving to Azure, Google Cloud Platform or AWS, and having access to processing near to where their local data is being stored. You can also see the container options up in the top right-hand corner, Kubernetes and Docker. And then very, very new is that Safe are starting to put their engine directly into the database. So Snowflake is the first where that's happened. So you have the ability now to store your data in your database of choice and process it right there within the Snowflake platform. But what we're also starting to see is a capability to have a remote engine. So traditional installation of FME might be in a particular environment, like on your on-prem environment, but maybe you've got some data that's sitting outside of your organization and you don't want the effort of moving it around and also the security concerns of doing so. So this might be the kind of setup that you've got, where you've got your data processing engine capability here. Outside the organization, you have your Azure environment, and the traditional requirement would be that you would reach out to your Azure database, grab the data you wanted, bring it back inside the firewall, process it, and then put the result back out there. Well, now you can actually put the FME engine out in this environment, send the request to run a job, do the processing out in Azure, load the data back into the Azure database, and not move the data at all. And that's really important if you're an organization that's got offices that are potentially in different geographic regions and you've got data sovereignty concerns, so you want to run a job in an Australian region without the data leaving the Australian region. So some really interesting capabilities around how you set up your FME processing environment. In terms of new capabilities, the platform has just received a little bit of an extension. So as I alluded to at the beginning there, FME Form, FME Flow, and FME Flow Hosted are the platform components as they exist at the moment. And those of you that have been close to FME for the last few years will know that there has been an augmented reality app that's been available that you could have a look at. The challenge with it has been, partly it was designed for people like us, not necessarily people out in the field with gloves on and fingers that they want to just push a button and get something to work. So it was designed by a developer for end, technical users. And also it's been set up so that it was kind of, no one was quite sure whether it was going to have a future after a little while, but Safe have properly put it on the map. So there is now a product called FME Realize. So this is it's a fully invested part of the FME platform. It is the new augmented reality app, and it allows you to experience and visualize your data, and it is a complete part of the platform. So how does it work? Fundamentally, you have your data, you write a workspace, you publish the workspace to FME Flow, and then you create an app that is connected directly to your FME Flow instance. And you can then start to do things like we see on the right-hand side here. So we can place your data into the field, and you can connect third-party GNSS receivers to get better accuracy than you might have in the device. And you can start to position, reshape, and interrogate your data, and also start to push requests from the field back to the database to make edits. So it's, as I say, fully fledged capability. Now, it is the very first iteration after it's kind of been field tested in its previous iteration, but it's a full part of the FME platform. It's available on iOS. It's completely free to download and use. The obvious suggestion from the slide I showed you earlier on, though, is you need an FME Flow to connect it to. It's all driven by engines, but the actual volume of users for using the app is as many as or as few as you wish. Just a couple of small things about the delivery of FME. So in terms of the current release schedule, you'll all be familiar with this, and we've stood up here and told you in the past that SAFE have been kind of revising this a little bit so that they take the emphasis off the .0. Well, they've done so completely by getting rid of the .0. So the intention is that starting next year, they're going to move to 4 formal releases, and more importantly for us, when we're advising customers, we'll have an individual month that we can tell customers when that release is going to come out, so you can plan that. They're simplifying the release build numbers, so we've got a year and a build, a .2 release, and then one more suffix. So a formal quarterly release. Predictable critical updates. We live in an IT environment where critical updates are more frequent than we perhaps would like. At the moment, SAFE kind of do a patch or a fix within the current year's build. They're going to be promising that that will be 2 years back, and you'll be able to install patches, and you'll be given patches for those old installations. This is quite a big deal. The one health warning to suggest, though, is that at first it may require a full reinstall. Now, actually, we have had some patches that we've been able to apply to existing builds in the last couple of years, but the norm will likely be that you'll have support, but you'll probably have to do a formal upgrade. However, so this is a roadmap item you can see in the top right-hand corner. The one thing that SAFE are exploring is a much more focused approach to delivering small patches of critical updates to existing infrastructure. So we think that's a good thing and a good way that they're going. They're also looking at breaking up the installers, because everybody in this room is going to care about a particular part of the FME platform, and you'll all cross over at certain parts, but when an organisation deploys FME, to be able to pick and choose what part you want to install rather than having to install everything and getting a whole bunch of drivers set up that perhaps your Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation is not going to be happy with, or the fact that you're going to have to support from an IT perspective certain components that you aren't as an organisation ever going to use. So this is something that SAFE are exploring, to have a packaged delivery. And what's come out of this already is a really positive step. So FME 2025.0, you'll notice a subtle screen grab difference here. That's the .1. So what has happened is 25.0, you'll notice that if you download the installer and you happen to be on a machine that has no internet access, you'll have no help documentation. Okay? You have to physically go and download a help package and install it on the machine where you think you might have an internet outage, or whether you're on a server that has no access. And the reason why they've done that is to pave the way for multi-language support. Okay, so at the moment, if you go and have a look at the beta release of 25.1, which is in beta, but we're expecting it officially in July, you can go and get an English, German, French, Hindi, or a Dutch language pack to download and install on your local machine. And that means that they've gone to the application level as well. So the same language packs are able to be downloaded for the application, and that is for form and flow. So you can, Arnold, you can Dutchify your FME interface now. So
I saw from HTML, there's still some gaps in the translations.
Yeah, there definitely are. And the reason is because they've used AI to generate a lot of it, but they have been sending the results to partners in the specific territories to proof the content. So it's going to be an iterative process, and there absolutely are some gaps. There's also some mistakes, but they've got to the point where we've got multi-language support, which we've been asking for multiple years, and now it's actually practical to get a starter for 10. So the .1 is the first iteration, but we're going to see more language packs added in over time. Okay, and the reason why, one of the things I want to get to really is what we think is a bit of an exciting capability that's been added into FME. So it is a bit of a sort of a new era, I think, in terms of capability, and it puts FME on a little bit of a different plane in terms of what you might expect about it. Just indulge me though for a moment. I'm going to set the scene. A small bit about myself, just for a minute. I'm a maker. I make stuff. I quite like woodwork. So I started dabbling with making bowls and live edge shelves and pergolas and bits and pieces. I'm also a destroyer, so that's one of my bedroom floors at the moment, and there's no plaster on those walls anymore, and the floors are up. I like doing this stuff. I don't like doing this sort of stuff so much, but the product of both of those things is I love a tool. I really love a tool. It also means that I have a favourite shop. Can you guess what it is yet? So I now have to solve the mic. I'd like to say that this jumper was bought for me as a gift. I bought it myself. I did buy a friend one as well, but anyway, yeah, I mean, that's my local Screwfix. I mean, who takes a selfie outside Screwfix? You know, this sadly is not a sponsored section. I really wish it was. I did think of reaching out to Screwfix, but yeah, you'll see why I didn't in the end. But this is just a patch of waste ground. It's a mile from my house, and I was chatting to some friends after a while just to express how excited I was that we've now got a Screwfix a mile away. So I can take my kids for a bike ride now to Screwfix. It's got so bad that my 9-year-old now knows how to go to the counter and ask with the code that they send you. Anyway, I digress. The reason why I'm telling you about Screwfix, this is me putting some fencing up. All my kit is kind of sponsored by Screwfix. All of my workwear is sponsored by Safe Software. That's my FME branded beanie that I've got on there. But I was in a team meeting chatting to Claire, and it turns out I'm not the only one with a problem. It turns out that you don't want to get near Claire and a mallet, but yeah, she's got the same challenge, likes a bit of renovation. I think this is probably the second house you've got involved in. But also, she abuses her access to the Safe Software swag box as well, as you can see. Why am I telling you all this? Well, partly, I'm an FME trainer. When I'm training people, I like to suggest that you go and play with some data that you care about with FME to get to understand the technology, but you're doing it with a bit of data that you care about and you're interested in, you think is a bit of fun. I also quite like the idea of scraping data. There's so much data that sits out on websites that's in a format that is just not quite accessible, but you know you could do something with it if you could just grab it and restructure it in some way. So I'm using this scenario to kind of give you a little understanding of a bit of new technology. And it's because on the Screwfix website, if you go up into the top right-hand corner, there's a store finder. If you go to the store finder, you can go and punch in a postcode and get back the nearest shops nearby. But it's several nested levels. And basically I wanted to try and scrape it, see if I could first, see if I could replicate the functionality and see if I could slightly extend the store finder page to make things a little bit different. But I want to introduce data virtualization. That's the whole point of this. Data virtualization is the new feature in FME, and it basically means that you have the ability to set up a workspace as a service. So you build a workspace and host it on FME Flow, and you make it visible to the outside world through an API. And you can now build APIs through the FME Flow interface without writing any code. So the first thing to do is just to explain for a moment, because I went out for a walk with a mate the other night and I started waxing lyrical about APIs. 10 minutes in, he said, "What's an API?" So just in case, think of the restaurant scenario. You go into a restaurant, you grab a menu, you look at the rules, the menu, what you're allowed to have. You ask the waiter or waitress you tell them what you'd like, they go away to the chef in the kitchen, deliver your request, and the chef goes and puts it together based on the ingredients that are available, and it gets delivered to you, okay? So, in an IT perspective, you decide what you want, you ask the database, the system behind the scenes for that thing, and it gets delivered to you based on the rules that have been defined in the application programming interface, the API. Go and have a look at the Postman website. Much better explanation. That's where I nicked the picture from, but the postman.com website has got a really, really good article. So in terms of scraping data, this is what we're working with. So we've got a site, there's a store locator in the top right-hand corner. If you click on the View All Stores option, so you get through to the next level, and this will be a listing of all the stores in the country, and you get a dedicated name. And what you'll notice is that if you click onto one of those, You then go to a URL that's got an obscure code in it, which appears to relate to nothing in particular. And then there's the name, and the name matches the name that was on the previous tiered page. But this dedicated page is where the store address is and where the opening hours are. So we want to effectively navigate that 3-tier nested website to go and grab the store times and the address so that we can do something with it. So we've got a workspace here that does that job, and basically we're going to navigate the website, extract the details, use the Google geocoder to geocode the location of the store, count how many there are in the country and load them into a database. Okay? And that workspace is what does the job. So here we've got an HTTP caller, and we're going to make a GET request to stores.all, and you'll see that importantly there's some headers here, and the headers are effectively to spoof the website, to tell the website that I'm a browser, I am not somebody using FME trying to connect to the website to grab contents from the site. So when we do that, we then get the contents of the entire page back in HTML, and you can see that you can just browse your way through there and see the entire content. So we hit the page, grab the entire contents after we've authenticated against it, and then we go and use the HTML extractor to go and grab the bits of the web page that we want. So here we want the dedicated URL, the store name, and details about those stores. And you can see we've got a positive response, but we've got a list feature, and you can see all of the individual store names now listed in that list at the back end of the workflow. And you can see there's our URL suffix that contains that funky code that we couldn't predict, but it's stored in the URL that we can use there. List Exploder allows me to break apart all of those requests into one per store. So I now have the dedicated URL and store name listed in there, one per row. And then we can go and do a little bit of attribute cleanup, because some of those names have got a little bit of text, a little bit of HTML that needs removing, and some of them, well, for all of them, we have to build the URL, so we have a static prefix and a variable suffix that we're going to define there. And then we just want to take the URL that we've built and send that to the Screwfix website in order to go and bring back the store address and also the opening times. So there's our store address and opening time. So it's exactly the same technique. We're just hitting the website multiple times to bring back just the information that we want to grab. And there's our store address. And you see you've got the HTML breaks in there, so we're going to use a little attribute technique to clean that up. And then all we do at the end of the workflow here is we use the geocoder, and we're using the Google geocoder there to pass the address to the Google API. And I think there's 10,000 free requests a month, and you see there's all our stores across the country. And then we just squirt that data straight into a database. And in this case, I'm just using a feature writer, and it loads it into a geo package. And you'll notice that I'm putting it into the shared data resource. So I'm putting it into a shared folder on FME. And I just want to run that job at an interval. So the next step really is to set that workspace up as a scheduled job. And I get it to run every 6 months or every week or whatever interval you want to set it up in. So this FME Flow automation has just been defined, and you can see in here that I've got a workspace with a repository called Screwfix, and it stores the workspace and some metrics about it. And if I set up an automation, I can get this, as you see, it's running, it's set up as a schedule. I think this runs weekly, it runs on a Sunday night at 9 p.m. Runs the workspace, and it sends an email on success or failure. And the email template that you can see on the right hand side here is set up so that the job status gets put into the text and the subject body, and it just comes to Simon and I, actually, that email every time it runs, and it tells us whether it did the successful load. Now you obviously don't, that sort of website, you don't need to run it very regularly. I mean, Screwfix stores don't come online and get dumped every 5 minutes, so you run it every few months, and you can start to get a view of the local storage of the stores. So now you've got a kind of a copy of the locations of all those shops. I want to publish them. I want to share them so I can do something with them, because I can't interact easily with the Screwfix website programmatically, but I'd like to be able to take some of that data. I can go into a new section of FME Flow called Data Virtualization, and I can define an endpoint. So I go in and I create an endpoint, I give it some documentation, I define what it is, so I'm going to allow a GET request, and for the stores request, I'm not going to require an input, there's going to be no question that I'm asking, so I'll just return all of the stores, and the nearest, I will return back the 5 nearest stores to a particular location. So there's our 2 setup, and then we just go into the interface and you download a template workspace. So we download the template workspace, and it includes the new data virtualization reader and writer. And that template workspace allows us then to just put our content in between. Okay? And you can see here that when I downloaded the template workspace, because I defined an input, which is what's the postcode coming in, I automatically get that defined as an attribute, and you can see it's already set up as a get reader. Now here's my workspace. This is what it does. The user is going to pass a postcode in, and I want to check, is it valid? And I want to check, is it real? So is it a valid postcode? Does it exist, or has someone just typed their name in? If it fails, then I go and get an API response that's not good. You can see if it becomes a postcode, then I go and check 100 kilometers around the postcode the user passed in order to read out some of the stores that are nearby, and then I use the neighbor finder up in the top there to go and look and find the nearest 5 Screwfix stores to the postcode that I pass in. And then I JSON format the data and pass it out, and that's the job done. Okay, if you want to have a go, scan that, and you can go and have a look at the published Swagger documentation. So Swagger is the standard for producing API documentation, and you can either go to the Screwfix docs, but this is a live site, and you'll be able to go to the docs and you can go and try it out. So if I go on, give this a quick go, you'll see this. Okay, so this is the documentation. So this is filled out and created automatically. I haven't had to code anything up at all. Here's my get stores, and I can go and try it out. And if I just push execute, this makes a request, runs a workspace behind the scenes, and gives me a live JSON feedback. And if I make that a little bit bigger, you can see that I'm just getting all 916 Screwfix stores as formatted JSON as a response. So that's my little workflow. You can then start to give that to people to use. So if you want a third-party app or a developer to get access to your data, you've now published it in a specific way, you've defined what columns you're interested in sharing with that end user, and they can now work on consuming that data automatically. Likewise, you could give it to a developer who's got the ability to make an app, and they can code that up and connect to your data set. And here we're slightly eating our own dog food because we're using an FME Flow app to do that. But you can see here I've got an HTTP call. I'm requesting my own nearest API. And then I'm building an FME Flow app to do that, and you can see that if you go there, you should be able to play with it on your device. So we've built a little app. If you scan that code with your phone, you'll get access to the interface that you see here. Just pop your postcode into it and hit run, and you should get a little map response back that gives you a spider diagram of the 5 nearest Screwfix stores to you, and the lines will be styled. Darker the line, the further away the store is, and you should be able to tap on the Screwfix store or the line. The line will tell you how far it is to the Screwfix store, and if you tap on the store itself, it'll give you the opening times and the full address. So it's a silly example, but we've kind of not done any coding to share some data, and the beauty of this is that you can start to do things that you've only dreamed of, because you can get intelligence from data that's sitting out in a partner's organization or on a site, a website that you've been trying to get hold of for a while. You can start to do change detection and monitor what's going on as a new solar farm turns up that gets published on a HTML table on a website. A new pharmacy, a new bank. You can start to provide new capabilities. So we could have filtered Screwfix shops by country or by region or super output area. We could have gone for stores that are only close to a motorway junction, or we could have gone one step further and looked at stock capabilities, any number of things. But if you look at this more broadly, you can start to see that you can share data with your existing platform and your existing skill set. You don't need to go and get new technology stacks to build an API. You can start to avoid duplicating data by sharing a lump of data with an organization and then worrying about what they're going to do with it or whether they're going to be looking at the right up-to-date information. Importantly, you can just switch it off. So you can just time out the API. When the partnership or the arrangement ends, you can change it. When the specification of the data changes and they want to change it, you just go and edit your API and make another attribute available, or remove a couple, or change the name. And then you can control how you're publishing the data. The one area I think is the most exciting is organizations that have got legacy systems that they've never been able to get into, and they've got modern technology or modern capabilities that they really want to get hold of and join up to that old data. If you've got the old legacy app, stick FME in the middle, connect to the old data, publish the data in a new way, and then the new applications can just connect to the API that you've published. So we're, as you can tell, by my stupidity, partly, very excited about this capability, but there's loads of resources. So if you go and have a look at the if you use that as a search term, getting started with data virtualization on the FME community, there's a whole bunch of tutorials that you can look at. This is only available in the beta at the moment, but as I say, it's going to be official in July, we think. So 25.1, you're going to need to have a play with it. If anyone really wants to have a go and doesn't have the ability to deploy a beta in their environment, we can set you up a Flow hosted environment that you can have a play with. That's really easy for us to do. There's also a very good on-demand webinar to go and have a look at that's been run recently. And if anyone cares, I really, really want a nail gun. I haven't had a nail gun before. I'm sure there's possibilities of things I could do with it, but anyway, we'll see. Thanks a lot. Cheers.